My dear brothers and sisters, we are in the 14th Sunday in Ordinary Time, and our Gospel this Sunday is still taken from the Gospel of St. Matthew. We have been reading from the Gospel of St. Matthew, and we are already in chapter 11. And I personally believe that this is one part in the Gospel of St. Matthew that a lot of people really love, especially when you hear Jesus saying, "Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest." And then he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart, and you will find rest for yourselves. For my yoke is easy and my burden light." Can you imagine having a very long day, very tiring day, and then you go home, open the Bible, and you read this line? These lines. It just relaxes you, comforts you, and as if relieves your fatigue. But is that really what Jesus means in our gospel today in these verses? That to follow Him will be easy, the burden will be light, seems like there will be no problem. Come to me, life will be easy. Is that really what He means in our gospel today? Well, my dear brothers and sisters, first of all, because if you look at the whole context of the teachings of the Lord, go to the whole Gospels, you will notice that it seems not true the way we are thinking of it will be easy to follow the Lord. In fact, for the past Sundays, if you have been following our reflections, chapter 9 and chapter 10, that's basically what Jesus was telling his disciples, that it was not easy to follow him. In fact, remember, in the Sundays, 3 Sundays ago, I believe, when he sent his disciples to the different towns and villages, remember, he also warned them of the great problems, persecutions they will encounter. Remember, he was telling them, "I am sending you like sheep among wolves. They will lead you to the synagogues. They will lead you to kings and governors." In fact, he says, "You will be hated by all because of me." And so the great persecutions that they will be encountering, and of course, remember that the persecutions they will encounter will not only come from the members of the community, but even from among their family members. Remember, Jesus was telling them, brother will hand over brother to death, his father, the father against his son, and all of those problems they're not gonna face. So what is Jesus talking about when he says, "Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest"? Well, first of all, the first thing that we must realize in this statement of the Lord is when he talks of burden, when he talks of labor, don't think of labor and burden like, "I'm tired today, I did a lot of things," okay? A lot of work. When he talks of burden, labor, Jesus was talking about the burden of the law. Remember that during for the Jews, there's nothing more important than obeying the will of God. And you have heard this already many times from Father. Remember, since the most important thing in their life is to obey the will of God, which should be the most important thing in our lives, what's their simple formula to make sure that they're able to follow the will of the Lord? Obey the law. Remember, the expression of the will of God is the law. Because God is the one giving the law. Can you give me an example of God's law? I had a father on a Sunday morning. The Ten Commandments. This is the most, simplest example. Because God, historically, in the Old Testament, remember that in the Old Testament, all the other cities have their kings. But Israel did not have their king. Okay? Israel will have their king way later. And the first king of Israel will be Saul. Remember, Saul will be the first king of Israel because they were complaining, "Give us a king." Remember, at first the prophet was offended. Why are you asking for a king? Why was he offended? Because for Israel, that's why they did not have a king, because God is their king. That's why God is the one giving laws to Israel. 10 Commandments, the best example. And so the most important, obey the will of God. And how do you obey the will of God? Obey the law. And to make sure that they're able to obey the law, what did they do? From the 10 Commandments, they made specific applications of the law. That's why we have the scribes, right? You still remember? I told you what the role of the scribes is? To write. That's why they are called scribes, because from the Latin word, scribere, to write. The scribes are the ones who made applications of the law. They wrote the law. Okay, that's why they are called scribes. So from the how many commandments, they multiplied the law to the point that it has become so complicated that in everything that they do, they have multiplied so much the law that in everything that they do, there's a law to follow. Can you imagine if your life is ruled by the law like everything? The example that I always give is that example I gave last night. Even washing of your hand. When we wash our hand, we just wash our hand, right? Except during the height of the pandemic, right? We were given instruction how many seconds. And the Jews are very specific. If you're gonna wash your hand, you have to pour water from the tip of your finger to the wrist. Okay? And then after pouring water from the tip of the finger to the wrist, that's the time you can rub your palms, and there's a certain way of rubbing, okay, with soap or whatever, and then after that, you have to pour water from the wrist to the tip. If you don't do it that way, you're not following the law. If you're not following the law, you have sinned. Can you imagine, like, even in farming, how I can tell you, you are not allowed to harvest up to the end of the farm because the edges are meant for the travelers when they are hungry. At the end of the day, nothing is left with your crops, okay? Because of the law. That's why when Jesus is talking about you who labor and are burdened, he was talking about the law. That all they did in their life is observe the law. It has become a burden, a labor. That the law, instead of becoming a means of encountering God, what happens? It hinders them from encountering it. Perhaps I just thought of it now. Even Sabbath law, remember? Instead of helping, it has become a hindrance to help. Because you're not allowed to work on Sunday. So even though somebody needs help to be lifted, you're not supposed to lift him. When he falls, thank you. Right? Can you see? So it has become a burden. No wonder when Jesus was asked, remember he was asked, how do you summarize the law? What was the summary of the Lord? Just give the answer, Father. Don't ask anymore. Remember Jesus said, love God and love your neighbor. By the way, why were they asking Jesus how to summarize the law? Because the scribes, after multiplying the laws, it has become so complicated that even them could not agree anymore how to summarize. Are you following me? It's an argument amongst themselves. That's why when they wanted to trap Jesus, okay, they approached Jesus and said, how do you summarize the law? Because they were thinking whatever his answer will be, some groups of the scribes will be mad at Jesus. But the answer of Jesus is, love God and love your neighbor. And that's the key to understanding our gospel today. What? Jesus says, for my yoke is easy and my burden light. Of course, we all know what a yoke is, right? The one you place at the back of the neck of the carabao, right? To pull the cart. We call that yoke. Now, always also put at the back of your mind, remember Jesus and Joseph are carpenters. Huh? That's why maybe he talks about yoke. And in Nazareth, it is believed that Joseph is the best yoke maker. Remember when Jesus uses examples, he gets it from experience. That's why he can practically talk about yoke, because that's their work. Now, of course, the yoke, I remember when as I have mentioned before, we grow our rice field. When I was young, until now, we have carabaos we use for plowing. I remember when I was young, we had 4 carabaos. Therefore, we have 4 yokes. And those yokes have names. Carabao A, Carabao B, Carabao C, Carabao D. You cannot interchange them. Why? Because the yokes are custom made to the Carabao. The whole yoke should be touching the whole neck up to the shoulder. Because if it doesn't touch the whole neck, it just touches a portion, it hurts. Cannot pull the cart, even though it's light. But if it is custom made, fits the neck and the shoulder, even though it's heavy, the burden becomes light. Are you following? Now connect it to the commandment of the Lord. What is the yoke of the Lord? You are all like, love. Love is the yoke of the Lord. How do you summarize the law? Love God and love your neighbor. If you love God and love your neighbor, the burden becomes light. I know you can relate with this. If you are asked by somebody you really love to do something, and yet it is difficult to do, what do you say? That's difficult, but I'll do it. Right? But if somebody asks you for something and you don't even love the person, what do you say? I'm busy. Okay? Perhaps even in dates, right? Or in appointments. If you love the person, even though the person is already 1 hour late, you stay. And when the person arrives, the person says, you have been waiting? No, I just arrived. But if you're waiting for a person you don't love, 5 minutes, you're going to send a message, sorry, I have to leave. I still have something to do. Ano? The Lord is telling us, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. What does that mean? My yoke is love. I was able to carry the cross to Calvary. I was able to accept death on the cross and suffering out of love. That's my yoke. If I don't love you, I won't carry this cross. I won't accept death on the cross. My dear friends, take the yoke of the Lord. Do everything out of your love for God and of your neighbor.